It began as a project of peace. Out on the edge of town, where the asphalt ended and the gravel road stretched into wide fields, I had built my life, quiet, methodical, and content. My family's farm sat at the end of a long dirt path that twisted through a stretch of undeveloped land. For years, that path was our lifeline. It was rough, uneven, and flooded every spring, but it was ours. When the town began to expand, I didn't think much of it. A few surveyors here, a few construction trucks there, just a slow creep of suburbia inching closer. But when they broke ground for what they called Maple Creek Estates, I started to notice the difference. Big houses, strict rules, and the one thing I never thought I'd see so close to farmland, an HOA. At first I ignored it. Their rules didn't apply to me. My land wasn't part of their development. I had deeds and boundaries that went back generations. My grandfather himself had marked the property lines with old oak posts that still stood, weathered but firm. But the road, that old dirt road, was getting worse each year. Delivery trucks refused to come down it. The county had long stopped maintaining it since it was technically a private easement. So one spring, after the rains turned it into a muddy mess again, I decided to fix it myself. I hired a crew. I paid every cent out of pocket. I didn't pave it for luxury. I did it so my tractors wouldn't sink and so my kid's school bus could actually reach our driveway without spinning its tires. By summer, the road was perfect. Smooth asphalt, neatly edged with a simple gravel shoulder. It felt like progress. It felt right. But the moment the dust settled, people noticed. At first it was subtle. Neighbors from the new development walking their dogs a little farther down the road, admiring the view of the open fields. Then came joggers, cyclists, even golf carts. It was harmless enough, and I didn't mind sharing the space. After all, the road is meant to be driven on. That changed when the HOA noticed. The first sign was a letter, polite but firm. They commended me on my improvements and claimed that the new pavement now enhanced access to community amenities. They also requested I submit the road to the Maple Creek Homeowners Association for maintenance and regulation purposes. I laughed when I read it. Regulation purposes on my land, my private easement. I tossed the letter aside, assuming it was just overreach from a board committee. But overreach was only the beginning. Within a week, small changes appeared. A Maple Creek HOA sign was staked at the end of the road, right where it met the county highway. At first I thought it was a mistake. But then they put up speed limit signs, 25 miles per hour, complete with the HOA logo printed at the bottom. They were claiming it. Still, I tried to stay calm. I had work to do. Crops to tend, fences to fix. But when I came home one Friday evening, my headlights caught something glinting in the dark. A steel gate, brand new, right across the entrance of the road I had paved with my own money. At first I thought it was for security, maybe construction or utility work, but when I drove closer, I saw the emblem. Maple Creek HOA, private access. My road. Their gate. I pulled over and walked up to it, my boots crunching on the gravel. The gate was locked with a keypad, the kind you'd see at a gated community. Behind it, the road I had paved to pave stretched silently toward my home, blocked off like it never belonged to me at all. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I went down to the county office. The clerk looked at me with practiced indifference when I explained what had happened. She pulled up the land records, scrolled and frowned. The road, according to the county, was listed as a shared access way, a technical term that never mattered before. The HOA had filed a temporary access maintenance agreement attaching it to their subdivision map. It didn't transfer ownership, but it gave them operational control for safety and community continuity. In other words, they had authority to maintain and regulate it. And the gate? They claimed it was for community protection. I left the office with a storm brewing in my chest. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They hadn't asked, they hadn't paid, they hadn't even told me they were doing it, and yet they'd locked me out of my own home. That night, I drove to the gate again. The keypad blinked mockingly in the dark. I considered cutting the chain, but I knew better. They'd twist it against me. Instead, I turned around, parked on the shoulder, and walked the mile back to my house under the moonlight, every step pounding with the same thought. They picked the wrong person to mess with. Because what the HOA didn't know was that the land beneath that asphalt, the easement, the soil, the right-of-way, wasn't just mine. It was protected by old deeds recorded before their community even existed. They thought a gate would stop me, but it was only the beginning.
The gate didn't just block my driveway, it divided the entire community. In the days that followed, I began to see just how deep the HOA's influence ran. From my window at dawn, I could see cars turning around at the road's entrance, delivery vans, school buses, even neighbors who once drove past daily. The new keypad system had shut everyone out unless their vehicle was registered with the HOA. And yet, somehow the HOA president's family had access. The landscapers who worked in the new development had access. Even the garbage trucks did. But I didn't. Every morning, I parked outside the gate, typed in random numbers on the keypad, and then made the long walk home. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just from exhaustion, but from humiliation. That road had been my pride, proof that I could improve something with my own hands. Now it was a symbol of control, a barrier that mocked me every single day. It didn't take long for rumors to start spreading. Online forums, local Facebook groups, even Nextdoor threads. Everyone was talking about the Farm Road incident. Some people said I had donated the road to the community. Others claimed I had built it illegally without a permit. The truth was buried under assumptions, paperwork, and HOA propaganda. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the road anymore. It was about power. HOAs thrive on control. They start with paint colors, mailbox heights, and lawn regulations. But once they get a taste of authority, they expand. They reach beyond fences and into lives. And now, they had reached into mine. The turning point came one afternoon when I returned from the market and found a letter taped to the gate. The HOA had issued a trespass warning. According to them, my recent unauthorized presence beyond the gate violated community security measures. They warned that any further unauthorized access could result in fines or worse, legal action. They were threatening me with trespassing on my own property. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. But instead, I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I started digging, not into the dirt this time, but into paperwork, county archives, public records, zoning maps, anything that could tell me how my private road had become a shared community asset. It took weeks. The more I read, the clearer it became. Someone in the HOA had pulled strings. The development's original plat map ended right before my property line. But a new version, filed just months before the road paving, extended their community boundary by 200 feet exactly to the midpoint of my road. The justification? Future access to community resources. That phrase was vague, but deadly. It allowed them to claim management rights over the road as long as it served public safety. Public safety, that was their shield. But there was something else, hidden deeper in the records, something they clearly hadn't expected anyone to notice. The original easement that allowed access to my land predated the subdivision by more than 50 years. It was listed under agricultural right-of-way, a term that gave me exclusive priority use, meaning, legally, I had more claim than any of them ever could. I had found my weapon. While I pieced this together, the community itself began to fracture. At first, the homeowners supported the HOA's decision. They believed the gate would reduce traffic and improve safety. But over time, the inconveniences piled up. Delivery trucks couldn't reach their homes without being pre-registered. Guests had to call ahead for access codes. Even emergency vehicles were delayed because the keypad malfunctioned during a power outage. The HOA president brushed off the complaints, but frustration brewed behind closed doors. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything: photos of the gate, copies of letters, timestamps when I was denied access. I even filmed the daily trek from the gate to my house, the camera shaking with every angry step, not for public attention, at least not yet, but for evidence. The more I watched those recordings, the more I noticed something chilling. HOA board members sometimes parked by the gate, watching. They'd linger in their golf carts, clipboard in hand, jotting notes. It was intimidation, plain and simple. Then came the night I found tire marks by the side of my house, deep, fresh tracks from smaller utility vehicles. They'd come in through the backfields, likely from the new walking trail that connected the subdivision to my property line. The next morning, I discovered stakes planted along my fence, marked with orange flags labeled Phase 2. That's when it hit me. The gate wasn't the end goal. It was the beginning of an expansion. They didn't just want the road. They wanted the land beyond it, my land. What I had thought was arrogance was actually strategy. The HOA's control over the road gave them the perfect justification to expand community infrastructure. They could claim that my farm was underutilized property, adjacent to their development, ripe for community integration. They wanted to absorb it. I knew then that waiting and hoping for reason wasn't an option anymore. That night, I drove to the gate one last time. The keypad light flickered under the stars, the hum of power running through its circuits like the heartbeat of something invasive. I stared at it and imagined all the signatures, the meetings, the quiet manipulations that had led to this point. They thought they could bury me under paperwork, but I had something stronger than that: truth. The fight was no longer about access. It was about ownership, legacy, and defiance. As dawn broke over the fields, I stood on the other side of the gate, the farm stretching wide behind me. In that moment, I made a silent promise, not to tear it down in anger, but to dismantle their control piece by piece, using their own systems against them. Because every HOA has cracks, and I was going to find every single one. The HOA liked to hide behind paperwork. They thought policies could protect them, that rules could smother guilt, that printed words on letterhead carried more weight than truth itself. But what they didn't realize was that paper cuts both ways. And once I learned how their system worked, I knew exactly where to press. The first step was learning the language of the enemy: bylaws, covenants, amendments, and fine print. Most people never read those documents. They sign once, pay their dues, and let the board make decisions in the background. But I read every page. I studied every clause, every obscure definition. What I found was a maze of contradictions, rules that granted power, and footnotes that quietly took it away. Buried deep in their own bylaws was a clause, barely legible, tucked under a section about property easements. It said that no community authority could extend beyond the boundaries of land explicitly deeded to the association. My road was not deeded. It was not shared. It was not common ground. On paper, the HOA had overreached. But paper alone wasn't enough. I needed evidence, proof of intent, of manipulation. I needed to show that the board didn't just act mistakenly, they acted deliberately. So I began attending open meetings,
not as a member, but as an observer. State law allowed residents within a 1-mile radius to attend, even if they weren't under the HOA's jurisdiction. Most people ignored that right. I didn't. The meetings were exactly what I expected: self-importance disguised as civic duty. A handful of board members sat behind folding tables in the community clubhouse, speaking in circles about budgets and landscaping. On the surface, it looked harmless, but when they mentioned road maintenance expenses, my stomach turned. They were using community funds, homeowner money, to maintain my road. That was the proof I needed. After the meeting, I filed a public records request for all expenses related to Maple Creek Road. It took weeks, but when the documents arrived, the truth was undeniable. They had paid for the gate, the keypad system, and even the decorative shrubs lining the entrance, all with HOA funds. And the signatures authorizing those expenses? 2 names appeared repeatedly: the HOA president and the vice president. Both had direct financial interests in the construction company hired for the work. It was corruption, neatly wrapped in bureaucracy. From that point, the fight transformed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the investigator. I began building a case. I recorded the gate malfunctions, documented delivery delays, collected testimonies from frustrated residents. I discovered homeowners were being fined for parking near the gate, even when the gate itself caused the obstruction. The HOA called it safety enforcement. I called it extortion. Each week the cracks widened. Residents who once supported the HOA began to whisper dissent. Some complained that the board was acting without community votes. Others grew tired of the endless fees. The illusion of order was fading. One night, a storm rolled in. Lightning flickered across the horizon, illuminating the gate in violent flashes. The power went out across the development, and for the first time, the gate failed. It hung open, silent, powerless, defeated. I stood there, drenched in rain, watching as the storm stripped their symbol of control bare. For a brief moment, the road looked the way it used to, free, open, and alive. But I didn't walk through. Not yet. Because victory wasn't about stepping past that gate. It was about making them remove it themselves. The next morning, I went to the county courthouse and filed a property rights complaint, attaching all the documentation I had gathered: photos, financial records, copies of bylaws, proof that the HOA had used community money to alter private property without consent. The clerk glanced through the stack and gave a slow nod. The process, she explained, would take time. Investigations always did. But she also said something that lingered in my mind. If what you're saying is true, this could go far beyond a local dispute. I didn't realize it then, but she was right. Over the next few weeks, the investigation gained traction. The county zoning department reviewed boundary maps and discovered the alteration I had uncovered months earlier: the falsified extension of the subdivision line. They confirmed it was filed without proper approval. That discovery triggered a chain reaction. The HOA board was notified. The president called an emergency meeting. And although I wasn't inside the clubhouse that night, I could imagine the panic, the shuffling papers, the raised voices, the fragile empire beginning to crack. Word spread fast. Residents who once defended the board now demanded answers. The community that had once been united by the illusion of exclusivity was now divided by suspicion. In their desperation, the HOA doubled down. They issued a new community access policy, claiming that the gate was essential for liability protection. They warned residents that removing it could void their insurance coverage. It was a last attempt to scare people back into obedience. But fear only works when people feel powerless. And that was no longer the case. By the end of the month, several homeowners filed their own complaints, citing mismanagement and misuse of funds. The HOA board was forced to release financial records publicly, and there, in black and white, was the connection I'd been waiting for. The president's brother owned the construction firm that had installed the gate. It was corruption, neatly wrapped in bureaucracy. That discovery spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. It was no longer about me or my road. It was about betrayal. The next week, a motion for a board recall vote was filed. The HOA's leadership faced its reckoning. As for me, I stayed quiet. I watched from my porch as the community that had once treated my land as theirs now turned on itself. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Yard signs appeared. Restore transparency. End HOA corruption. The same people who once enforced the rules now demanded freedom from them. It was poetic. But even as the board began to crumble, I knew the fight wasn't over. Bureaucracy doesn't vanish overnight. There were still loopholes, still technicalities that could trap me again if I let my guard down. So I waited. I watched, and I prepared for the final push. Because this was no longer just a story about a road. It was about ownership, about standing up to systems that believe power is theirs by default. And when that gate finally came down, it wouldn't be with cutters or chains. It would be with signatures, legal seals, and the undeniable weight of the truth.
The gate had been meant to symbolize order, control, exclusivity. But by the time summer turned to fall, it had become a monument to division. Every morning, I'd see cars idling at the keypad, frustrated residents typing codes that never worked. The system was failing more often now. Too much rain, too little maintenance. When it jammed, the line of vehicles would stretch down the main road, horns blaring in unison like a protest march trapped behind metal bars. Inside the neighborhood, chaos simmered beneath manicured lawns. The HOA board had once ruled with polished newsletters and friendly reminders. Now their communications read more like threats. Mandatory compliance, immediate fines. Failure to adhere may result in penalties. The language of authority was cracking under its own weight. Word of the board's misconduct had spread like wildfire through online groups and text chains. The recall vote was set for mid-October, but the weeks leading up to it turned the quiet, picture-perfect streets of Maple Creek into a battlefield of suspicion. Neighbors who used to wave at each other across driveways now glared in silence. Those who supported the board placed "Protect Dot Community" signs on their lawns. Those who wanted change put up handmade posters that said simply, "Tear down the gate." It was poetic, really. The very gate they built to keep others out had become the wedge that split them apart. I kept my distance, at least physically, but every headline, every thread, every new discovery carried my fingerprints in some small way. I had sent my documentation anonymously to several residents, knowing that it would only take a few voices to ignite the revolt. I didn't need to shout my truth. All I had to do was whisper it in the right ears. And soon, the whisper turned into an echo. At night, when the clubhouse lights glowed in the distance, I could hear faint arguments drifting across the fields. The HOA president's voice, sharp, desperate, defensive, carried through the air like the sound of glass cracking. Meetings that once ended in applause now ended with slammed doors. The revolt was spreading faster than even I anticipated. By early October, the board was drowning in accusations. The misuse of funds, the falsified maps, the nepotism, it all came out, piece by piece. Homeowners demanded refunds. Contractors refused further work. Even the landscapers stopped showing up. The once pristine community began to unravel. Grass grew long. Trash bins overflowed. For the first time, the HOA's illusion of perfection collapsed. And still, the gate stood. Every time I drove past it, I wondered how long it would take before someone broke it in anger. It had become a symbol of everything people hated: the arrogance, the control, the waste. I didn't have to wonder for long. One morning I found it hanging crooked, the keypad torn from its post, deep tire marks cut through the gravel shoulder leading straight toward the neighborhood. Someone had rammed it in the night. The steel frame bent inward, twisted like a crushed can. The HOA sent out an emergency notice calling it vandalism, but to the residents, it wasn't vandalism, it was liberation. For the first time in months, the road was open. Cars flowed freely again. The sound of engines replaced the silence of control. I stood there at dawn, watching the sunrise reflect off the twisted metal. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part of me knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The road was open, yes, but legally, the paperwork still existed, and paperwork doesn't bend like metal does. That week, the recall vote happened. Over 70% of homeowners voted to remove the entire HOA board. The results were decisive, almost ruthless. The president, the vice president, the treasurer, all forced to resign. It should have felt like the end, but revolutions are messy. The new interim board promised transparency, but chaos had already infected the community. Without leadership, homeowners stopped paying dues. Contracts went unpaid. The once strict neighborhood began to look like a ghost of its former self. Lawns uncut, fences peeling, a sense of neglect creeping in like ivy. And still, even in defeat, the old board members fought back. They filed an injunction against the recall, claiming it was procedurally invalid. They argued that external interference, a thinly veiled reference to me, had influenced the vote. For the first time, my name entered the official narrative. The county investigator contacted me directly. My documentation had become central to the inquiry. They wanted testimony, they wanted confirmation, they wanted the truth, recorded and signed. I agreed. Sitting in that sterile office, facing a county official with the recorder on the table, I realized how far the story had come. What began as a simple road project had spiraled into a full-scale investigation of fraud and abuse of authority. The official listened, nodding occasionally, asking for clarification as I laid out the timeline. The paving, the first letter, the gate, the altered maps, the financial conflicts. When she finished, she switched off the recorder and said something that would echo in my mind for weeks. This may go beyond the HOA. The construction contracts tie back to the developer. If those were falsified, this could turn into a criminal matter. Criminal. The word hung in the air like thunder before a storm. I left that office that day feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I had won, at least in spirit, but the fight had grown bigger than me. What started as personal injustice was now an open wound in the community, one that exposed greed, manipulation, and the fragility of control. The following week, county inspectors arrived at Maple Creek. They measured, photographed, reviewed. Residents gathered in clusters watching the officials in reflective vests move around like harbingers of judgment. When the results came back, they confirmed what I always knew. The gate and all associated structures sat on private property. My property. Within days, a county order demanded that the remnants of the gate be removed and the area restored to its original condition. The HOA, leaderless and bankrupt, had no funds left to fight. And so one morning, under the wide orange glow of sunrise, the workers came. They unbolted the frame, hauled away the pieces, and leveled the ground. The gate that had divided us was finally gone. I watched from a distance, not as a victor, but as a witness to the collapse of arrogance. But even as the trucks drove away, I couldn't shake a strange feeling, the calm before something bigger. Because destruction leaves room for something new to grow, and sometimes what grows back isn't peace. The community had no gate, no leadership, and no unity left. And the land, my land, was now free again. But in the silence that followed, I began to wonder what freedom would cost next.
The gate was gone, but its shadow remained. It lingered in paperwork, in silence, in the uneasy way people avoided eye contact at the end of the road. The steel was gone, but the power that built it had simply retreated, waiting, watching. When the county declared the gate illegal, I thought it would close the book on the whole mess. But bureaucracies rarely end stories. They just write quieter chapters. Weeks passed. The neighborhood slipped into an uneasy calm. The HOA was leaderless, its funds frozen while auditors tore through years of records. For the first time in months, I could drive freely to my farm again. The sound of my tires on asphalt felt like freedom itself. But freedom has a strange sound when it echoes in empty space. One morning, I noticed survey flags, bright orange ones, planted farther up the property line. Not HOA flags this time. These bore the logo of Ravenwood Development Group, the original company that had built Maple Creek Estates years earlier. That name hadn't appeared in months. Seeing it again was like finding a ghost in daylight. At first, I thought it was cleanup work, maybe boundary verification after the investigation. But the more flags appeared, the clearer it became someone was mapping again. Something was coming. A week later, heavy trucks rolled in. Not the local kind, the big rigs that carry rebar and cement. They parked near the old trail that cut across my field, engines idling like predators waiting for permission to strike. The workers avoided eye contact, moving quickly, efficiently. When I checked the county's permit database, a new file had appeared, stamped only days before. Phase 2 Expansion, Ravenwood Development, LLC. They were back. The HOA had been a puppet. The gate, the map extensions, the maintenance agreements, all of it had been the opening act. Behind it stood the real architects, the developers who wanted to stretch Maple Creek into the farmland that surrounded it. My farm wasn't just a nuisance to them. It was the missing piece of land that connected two parcels they already owned. Without it, their expansion was fragmented. With it, they could double their footprint. And that road, the one I had paved, had made my property valuable to them again. It wasn't personal for them. It was business. But for me, it was survival. Over the next few days, I pieced together the pattern. The HOA board members who resigned had all signed agreements with Ravenwood years earlier, agreements tied to early homeowner incentives and property upgrades. The same construction company that built the gate had worked on other Ravenwood projects. The overlap wasn't coincidence, it was design. The corruption hadn't started with the HOA. It had started long before the first house in Maple Creek was even built. Developers build communities like chess players plan endgames, every move calculated, every rule bendable if the payoff is big enough. The HOA was just their middle piece, the pawn they sacrificed to move closer to their goal. Once the board collapsed, Ravenwood stepped back in, pretending to restore order. They presented themselves to the county as a concerned partner, offering to assist with community restructuring. Their goal was clear: reestablish control through a different door. And the county, overworked and underfunded, welcomed the help. That's when I realized I was facing something bigger than neighborhood politics. This was about influence, money, the quiet deals made in offices where no one asks questions because everyone benefits. I started tracing Ravenwood's filings. Public records showed a web of shell companies, LLCs tied to the same few names. The same addresses appeared across multiple development projects, some halted, some still expanding. A pattern of acquiring farmland, then converting it into mixed residential, then selling the lots to newly formed HOAs that they still controlled through consulting subsidiaries. Maple Creek had been just one of many. The gate hadn't been built to protect residents. It had been built to establish control for the next phase of land acquisition. And my road, my private, hand-built road, had been their test case. The realization settled over me like dust after demolition. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a machine. Ravenwood had power because people believed it couldn't fight it. The HOA had fallen because it believed the same thing. But I had already proven that paper walls can be torn down. So I did what I always do when someone underestimates me. I started preparing again. I documented everything anew: the trucks, the survey flags, the filings. I contacted the county inspector who had handled the previous case. Her tone was cautious now. She knew there was more beneath the surface. She couldn't say much, but she confirmed that multiple complaints about Ravenwood were already under review. Then, quietly, the noise began again. The developer sent mailers to nearby homeowners, promising new amenities and expanded access routes. They framed it as progress, as community enhancement. It was the same playbook, new faces, same story. But this time, the community didn't bite. The homeowners who once obeyed the HOA now questioned every notice, every meeting, every change. They had learned to distrust authority that came with polished stationery. And though they didn't know it, I was feeding that distrust, carefully, anonymously. A scanned document here, a leaked permit there. Nothing that could trace back to me directly, just enough to keep the truth circulating. The more light I cast, the more shadows they revealed. By midwinter, the investigation into Ravenwood turned public. County auditors announced irregularities in multiple developments, missing funds, unfiled permits, falsified surveys. It became a headline story in the local paper. Developer under scrutiny after HOA collapse. The timing was perfect. As the article spread, Ravenwood halted all construction. The trucks vanished overnight, leaving behind tire tracks and silence. The orange survey flags slowly disappeared, one by one, plucked by the wind or by unseen hands. And for the first time in nearly a year, the land was quiet again. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. It often means someone's regrouping. Ravenwood still owned property nearby. The county could investigate them, maybe even fine them. But companies like that rarely die. They rebrand, rename, and start over. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed. The HOA had fallen. The developer had been exposed. The county was watching. All that remained was the land itself, my land, and the road that connected it to everything else. Standing there at dusk, the horizon glowing amber, I thought about what that road had cost me. Money, time, sleepless nights, months of frustration and doubt. But it had also revealed something vital: how fragile systems of power really are. A single stretch of pavement had exposed an entire network of greed. And yet, as I traced my hand across the smooth asphalt, I realized something deeper. Power doesn't just corrupt those who have it, it tests those who fight it. Because when you stand your ground long enough, you stop being just a victim of the system. You become part of the story that changes it.
The fight had burned itself out by winter. The gate was gone, the trucks had fled, the lawyers were circling like crows that had already eaten. What remained was silence, the heavy, uncertain kind that follows a long storm. For the first time in months, I could drive the entire stretch of asphalt without seeing a sign, a camera, a single mark of authority. The air smelled of cold pine and diesel from the distant county plows. I rolled the window down and listened to my own tires humming against the road I had once feared to lose. Freedom sounds like that: steady, simple, unspectacular. But the silence that followed victory can be dangerous. It invites questions you've avoided asking. Questions about what all of it was for, and what comes next. The county finished its investigation that February. Ravenwood was fined, its permits suspended, its executives quietly stepping down before indictments could land. The HOA, now legally dissolved, transferred its remaining accounts to a neutral trustee. What little money was left went toward restoring public easements and clearing the last debris from the failed expansion. On paper, justice had been served. In reality, justice is rarely clean. Reporters came first. They wanted the local man versus HOA story, the everyman who fought back. Drones hovered over the farm snapping pictures of the now empty stretch of pavement. My name appeared in headlines I never asked for. Each article simplified the truth into something digestible. Farmer wins against HOA. But victory, I learned, doesn't always taste like celebration. Sometimes it tastes like exhaustion. Neighbors who once accused me of trespassing now waved nervously when they passed, unsure whether to thank me or avoid me. Some wanted interviews, others wanted favors. A few even asked if I would sell. They said developers were still calling, different names, same hunger. I turned them all away. I had spent too long defending the ground beneath my boots to trade it for cash. But as the months dragged on, I began to understand how land changes people. It becomes less about soil and more about the stories attached to it. Mine had become legend, a cautionary tale whispered in community meetings across the county. They called it the Maple Creek lesson. Meanwhile, the road itself began to show the wear of neglect. Without official maintenance, cracks spidered through the asphalt, spring rains pooled in low spots where the gravel had shifted. I patched what I could with cold mix and determination, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. The county offered to take it over as a public route, promising regular upkeep in exchange for right-of-way access. It sounded reasonable, almost poetic, a return to normalcy. Yet I hesitated. That road had been the weapon, the wound, and the proof of my independence. To hand it over felt like letting history be paved over again. Still, practicality has its own logic. Freedom means nothing if the path to it crumbles. So I negotiated, slowly, carefully, every clause reviewed twice, every line initialed. The agreement would make the road public, but it would bear a name, Harrison Way, after my grandfather, whose original easement had started this entire chain of events. It was a small victory, quiet and deeply personal. When the county crew arrived in early summer to repave the asphalt, I stood at the edge of the field, watching the fresh asphalt roll out like ink on a blank page. The machines hummed steadily, their operators unaware that every pass of the roller was erasing a year of conflict and rewriting it into something ordinary. Ordinary was good. Ordinary was what I had been fighting for. But ordinary has its ghosts. Some nights, when the wind carried faint echoes from the empty subdivision, I could still feel the tension that once vibrated through those streets. The shouts from the meetings, the rattle of the gate in the wind, the quiet clicks of keyboards spreading rumors. The community was still there, though smaller now. Many homes sat for sale, lawns overgrown. People had moved on, but the memory remained baked into the asphalt. The news cycle moved on, too. Other HOAs, other scandals. Mine became a footnote, then a reference, then a forgotten link on a dead website. And yet, every so often, strangers would stop at the road's entrance, stepping out to read the new sign, Harrison Way. They'd look down the black ribbon cutting through open fields and whisper that name like a question. They'd never know the full story, the sleepless nights, the documents, the fear of losing everything. They'd see only the end result, a quiet country road that led to a farm and nowhere else. Sometimes I envied their ignorance. Other times I stood by the gatepost that no longer held a gate and felt a different kind of pride. Because while everyone else saw a stretch of asphalt, I saw proof that resistance can build, not just destroy. That fall, the first frost silvered the edges of the fields. The road gleamed pale under the moonlight, empty and perfect. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he marked boundaries with oak posts and simple faith and hard work. Those posts were still standing, though weather-worn, like quiet witnesses to everything that had happened. I realized then that this was never just about land. It was about permanence, the kind that can't be bought or voted away. The HOA had collapsed. The developer had fallen. but the road remained. And in the stillness of that autumn night, I understood that I had become the keeper of both, the builder and the defender, the one who refused to yield when the world decided he should yield.
Time has a way of softening edges, even the sharpest ones. A year passed, then another, and the memory of the battle began to fade from the headlines, from conversations, from the daily rhythm of life. But not from the land. The land remembers. Harrison Way stretched quiet and clean through the valley, bordered by slow-growing pines and the sound of wind slipping through tall grass. The county maintained it now, patching, repainting, keeping it smooth. But to me, it still felt personal. Every curve, every shadow was a reminder of the fight that had defined me for so long. At first, I drove it every day, not out of necessity, but out of habit, as if the act itself reaffirmed ownership. Over time, that need eased. I found peace not in control, but in observation. Watching others use the road, the mail truck, the school bus, cyclists in summer, felt strange at first, like sharing a secret. But slowly I realized that was the point. Some things are meant to be built for others to use. That's what makes them last. The community that had once stood behind the gate was smaller now. Many houses sat empty, their for sale signs leaning in the wind. But those who remained had changed. There were no more committees, no more power games, no more manicured perfection. Just people mowing their own lawns, fixing their own fences, waving to one another without the weight of rules between them. I saw children biking down the road that had once been locked away, their laughter echoing where silence used to reign. It was a sound the gate would never have allowed. The land around Maple Creek slowly returned to what it should have been, a mix of homes and open space, not a battlefield of property lines. Ravenwood's name disappeared from county filings. The company rebranded, moved on, rebuilt somewhere else. Corruption never truly dies, it just finds new soil. But here, at least, it had withered. My farm endured. The fields grew strong that year, the harvest heavy. I paved a small side path that connected to the main road, not out of defiance this time, but as an offering, a reminder that building doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes I'd stop at the place where the gate had once stood. There's no trace of it now. Not a post, not a dent, not even a scar in the asphalt. Just open air, unbroken and free. The wind there has a sound I never noticed before. Soft, steady, uncontained. It reminds me that ownership is never truly about fences or deeds. It's about stewardship, the quiet responsibility of protecting something from those who see it only as leverage. I learned that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through paperwork, through politeness, through promises that sound like progress. The HOA had dressed its greed in community spirit. The developer had masked its hunger as growth. But underneath, both spoke the same language: control disguised as care. What they didn't understand was that real care means letting things breathe, letting them belong to everyone. I used to think the fight was about winning. Now I know it was about learning when to stop fighting. The road taught me that. Every storm leaves behind clearer skies, but it also leaves a choice: rebuild the same walls or leave them down. I chose the latter. The gate was gone for good, and with it went the part of me that once needed to prove ownership through resistance. Now, when strangers drive by, they sometimes slow down, admiring the view, the stretch of farmland rolling into the horizon, the dark asphalt ribboning between green and gold. They don't know the story. They don't know what it cost. But that's all right. Because legacy isn't about who remembers your fight. It's about what stands after it's over. One evening in late autumn, I walked the length of Harrison Way at sunset. The light burned low across the fields, washing the road in gold. The world was quiet, except for the sound of gravel under my boots. I reached the end where the county line begins, and for the first time, I stepped past it. There was no fence, no post, not a marker, nothing to say where one thing ended and another began. Just open earth, waiting. I realized then that boundaries aren't drawn to keep people out. They're drawn so we can understand what we're willing to protect. And sometimes, protecting something means letting it go. The farm will stay, the road will stay, but the anger, the fear, the endless need to guard what was mine, that can fade now. Because I know the truth. I didn't build that road just to reach my land. I built it to prove that independence can still exist, even in a world obsessed with ownership. That truth will outlast every sign, every law, every gate that ever tries to rise again. The road is free now, and so am I.